Be seated. You can call your next witness.
Your Honor, this time stay with Dr. Foggy.
Everybody have a good lunch? All right, you found out all the places downtown by now, I guess. I don't know. There aren't too many of them, but let's see. Chief Face Clerk can be sworn, please, sir.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony given in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat and slide up the rail, please, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Afternoon.
Can you please introduce yourselves to the jury?
My name is Jeff Foggy. First name Jeff, last name Foggy.
Mr. Foggy, where are you employed?
I work for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement as a special agent, currently assigned to the Cybercrime Unit.
How long have you been an agent?
I've been an agent since 2012.
Okay. Prior to 2012, where were you employed?
I was employed by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement as a crime laboratory analyst in the firearms section.
What were you doing in the crime laboratory?
I did firearms identification. I worked in the firearms identification section.
What does that mean?
Essentially, the role of the firearms examiner is to examine firearms and their components to determine if a firearm works properly or functions properly. Also to look at components, whether they're fired or unfired, to determine if they're suitable for use in a firearm or if they're fired from or within a firearm. I also did serial number restorations, muzzle to target distance determinations, and tool mark identifications.
I assume that you had some sort of specialized training or experience that allowed you to do such things.
Yes, sir.
And could you please explain that to the jury?
I have 2 bachelor's degrees, one in chemical sciences from Florida State University and one in forensic science from the University of Central Florida. Aside from that, I also went through a 2-year-long training program at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that introduced me into the area of firearms identification.
Okay. And how long had you worked in the firearm lab before becoming a special agent?
Approximately 13 years.
During those 13 years, had you ever had an opportunity to testify in court and offer your opinion as to firearm analysis and whether or not projectiles were fired from the same weapons and things of that nature?
Yes, sir.
Okay, approximately how many times?
In excess of 150 times.
Your Honor, this time I tend to witness.
Any word? All right, you may proceed.
So let's talk a little bit about that. How do you go about making a comparison of, well, let's talk, I can back up a step. Let's talk about firearms in general. How does a firearm function?
Depending on the type of firearm, essentially what a firearm is it's a tool. It needs some ammunition or a bullet. You'll put the ammunition bullet into the tool. You'll pull the trigger of the firing mechanism. A small, we don't call it an explosion, but as the cartridge is impacted by parts inside the firearm, it causes gunpowder to burn and causes a projectile or a bullet to be fired down the barrel of the firearm and down towards its target.
And you mentioned something about different kinds of guns. Specifically, let's talk about handheld guns.
Okay.
Are there different types of handheld guns?
The 2 main types are pistols and revolvers.
Okay. What are the difference? A pistol is being what?
For a pistol, mainly semi-automatic pistols, what that means is that with each one pull of the trigger, a bullet will be fired downrange. Now, a semi-automatic pistol has what's called a magazine, or in common terms they call it a clip, but we call it a magazine. You put the unfired bullets or the rounds of ammunition in that magazine, insert it into the firearm, then you work a top mechanism on that firearm called the slide. You'll pull that back and go forward, it'll load that ammunition. You pull the trigger one time, the cartridge will send the bullet downrange. It'll then also kick that cartridge case out of the firearm. Then it'll make the firearm move again, cycle, we call it cycling, reload another round, pull the trigger, it'll do it again. It'll continue doing this as long as you're pulling the trigger one time and until the magazine is empty.
Okay. And you mentioned something about they would eject a cartridge?
That's correct. In a semi-automatic firearm, as you fire the firearm, as long as there's not a malfunction with the gun, a typical normally operating firearm in semi-automatic mode, when you pull the trigger, bullet goes down range, the top of that gun comes backwards and pulls that fired or spent cartridge case out of the gun and ejects it in a pattern mainly to the right. Some of them can go left. It really depends on the firearm.
Okay. Now, a revolver, what are you talking about there? What is that?
A revolver is also a handheld weapon, but instead of having a cartridge magazine that's inserted, it has a revolving cylinder. So what you do is you'll put a number of bullets or rounds into that revolving cylinder. You'll close that into the firearm, and then as you pull the trigger, depending on which type of firearm, and there are two different types of revolvers, and I can explain that if you want me to. There's a single action and a double action revolver. But essentially when you pull the trigger, the revolver, the cylinder will rotate, it'll fire the round, and then it'll wait for the next one. When you pull the trigger, the cylinder will rotate and it'll fire a round. The main difference between a semi-automatic and a revolver is the cartridges that are fired stay in that revolver until you manually remove them.
Let's talk a little bit, and I understand you work in a lab in firearms, but let's talk about a crime scene type situation. If you're utilizing a semi-automatic weapon that you talked about where it kicks the shell out, you would be expecting to possibly find those casings or cartridges, spent cartridges at the scene, correct?
I'd have to speculate that, but yes, a semi-automatic firearm would typically eject cartridge cases at the scene.
Okay. And then as a revolver, it wouldn't.
Correct, unless you manually open the revolver, empty the cylinder, then it could be found at the scene.
In this particular case, were you asked to make an analysis as to certain projectiles that were found at the scene or on a person's body regarding Brandy Peters, murder of Brandy Peters, her two daughters, Maya and Tanaya, and Javante Segura?
I was submitted evidence in this case, yes.
Okay. And when you say you were submitted evidence, you're talking about projectiles, correct?
That's correct.
What is a projectile? Let's talk about that.
A projectile is the piece of ammunition that's typically called the bullet. A lot of people in lay terms call a bullet, and when they hear about a bullet, they think of the whole unit of ammunition. In firearms identification, the projectile is that one piece of the cartridge component of the bullet that goes out of the barrel of the firearm and towards its target.
Whenever you're making comparisons of projectiles, how do you go about doing that?
Well, if you go to the manufacturers, we'll start with the manufacturing firearms. When they manufacture a firearm, they put inside the barrel of the firearms, they put what's called rifling. And what that is it's spiral grooves. It's meant to make the bullet spin as it goes down the barrel. And it's much like a football player throwing a football. If it spirals and spins, it's more accurate. So that was the idea behind putting rifling in the firearm. What that does for us in firearms identification is it creates microscopic imperfections on the inside of that barrel. So when the bullet makes contact with the barrel and starts spinning and going down the barrel, it leaves marks on the bullet, and those can be unique to a specific firearm. So by marking up the bullet, we can then take that bullet that's been fired, take it into our laboratory, and inside our laboratory we have what's called a comparison microscope. Now that's essentially two microscopes with one eyepiece, and that allows me to look at two different objects at one time with varying magnification. So I can start at a low magnification and go up to high magnification. What that allows me to do is I can look at those imperfections that the firearm has put on the projectiles and compare them to any other bullet that is submitted for comparison. Looking at these markings, I can then make an identification or make an opinion whether or not the bullets were fired from a particular firearm.
You have a booklet up here. It's got numerous projectiles. I should take a look through those real quick. And specifically, I'm asking you whether or not those are the projectiles that you compared as it relates to this particular case.
Yes, sir, they are.
So let's start with talking about those particular projectiles and what they are. State's Exhibit number 49, which is TPD number 15. Where is that projectile located at?
Where's it located at? Here?
Well, no, what the packaging, where does it say it was found?
This is State's Exhibit 49, you're saying?
Yes, sir.
State's Exhibit 49, my Exhibit 15 or 15, was on a towel below tub area in the master bedroom. Oh, I'm sorry, master bathroom, strike that, master bathroom.
Okay. So let's talk about this one for a second and what, as relates to firearms. In this particular case, it was testified earlier, this was found, as you just mentioned, on a towel below a shower stall. And we have an impact point there at the shower stall, where it appears the bullet, if you will, projectile, bounced off a small piece of metal and onto the floor. Typically, when you're talking about a firearm, I know I would think that when you're talking about a gun and a bullet being fired, they have very high velocity, they go really fast, and they hurt things and they go through things. Is that typically correct?
Well, projectiles are meant to go at a high rate of speed, yes.
Okay. Would it be normal in a situation for a projectile to simply bounce off a small piece of aluminum, such as this?
That would cause for me to speculate. It really depends on a lot of factors.
Okay. Well, one of those factors in this particular case, these projectiles you did, and ultimately we get to conclusion, but they were from a .32 caliber weapon, correct?
That's correct. The projectiles were 32 caliber.
What would be, as a .32 caliber weapon, is there some problematic issues with a .32 caliber that may cause it to bounce off a small piece of metal when firing a weapon?
I don't know that it would be problematic, but a 32 is not a very powerful round if that's what you're getting at. It's not as powerful, say, as a 45 or a 9mm or a 40.
As a .32, are there also different kinds of .32 ammunition?
There are.
Okay. Could you please explain that?
For a 32 caliber class, you have 32 autos, which is a specific projectile, type of projectile. You also have 32 Smith & Wesson, and you have 32 Smith & Wesson long, and there's a myriad of other 32 caliber projectiles. For this case, these projectiles were 32 auto calibers, and the way that was determined, if you want me to go into that.
You can,
Okay.
just briefly, and we'll get into your analysis a little bit
Okay.
more.
They were what's called jacketed. For projectiles, jacketing means there's some sort of metal coating put on the outside of it. So it's a lead inside with a metal coating on the outside. That is very consistent and typical with the 32 auto. 32 Smith & Wesson longs, 32 Smith & Wessons typically tend to be lead. The other difference is weight. There's a weight difference between the two.
Okay, so you can actually kind of tell the difference between the auto and the other, and long and the short, or the regular Smith & Wesson 32 based upon looking at the projectile.
Typically, yes.
Okay. What would happen if you fired, say, a 32 automatic in something that was designed for, say, a 32 long?
You would see some performance issues. The 32 auto is meant to be fired in a semi-automatic pistol. It's meant to be fired in a pistol that when it's loaded, it's all closed and contained, so all the energy goes down the muzzle of the barrel. When you put a 32 auto in, say, a revolver, there's a gap between the cylinder and the barrel, and so the performance of that round can be affected.
When you talk about the performance of the round, you're talking about how fast it goes and the effectiveness of that round.
Yes, because, like I said, it was meant to be fired in a 32 auto, so there's no gap between the rifling and the bullet when it's fired. With a revolver, there's that little gap, so that bullet has to cross that gap. So it's starting to lose energy right away. Then it has to impact the barrel, which causes it then to be affected as well. Typically, you'll see that there's lower velocity coming out of the muzzle.
Okay. And in that situation, a 32 caliber being fired out of a 32 caliber revolver, would that possibly lead to some sort of performance level here that would result in it bouncing off essentially a thin piece of metal?
Again, cause for speculation, but possibly.
Okay.
Again, I don't have all the factors that for this bullet. I don't know what else it hit.
Certainly. All right, let's turn to State's Exhibit number 50, TPD number 16.
Okay.
And where does it say that one's from?
State's Exhibit 50, my Exhibit 16 says projectile on floor of toilet room below toilet paper rack.
Okay. And next we have State's Exhibit number 26 or TPD 17.
State's Exhibit 26, my Exhibit 17, projectile from third shelf of hallway closet.
Okay. State's Exhibit number 71.
State's Exhibit 71, my Exhibit number 38 is projectile from southwest SW, rug area and living room.
Okay. And State's Exhibit number 103, your Exhibit number 94.
I don't show a State's Exhibit 103, I have a 103 with some letters.
103W, excuse me.
103W. 103W, State's Exhibit 94, says it's projectile from head, and in parentheses, top of head, close parentheses.
All right. State Exhibit number 103X, your number 95.
103X, projectile from left chest wall.
103Z, your Exhibit number 98.
103Z, my Exhibit 98, projectile from right side of jaw.
103AA, your Exhibit number 300.
103AA, Exhibit 300, projectile from left upper arm of Brandy Peters / foreign material from scalp wound of Brandy Peters.
And finally, 105B, your 105.
105B, State's Exhibit, my Exhibit 105, is projectile removed from the head of Tamaya.
Okay. I'm also going to show you, so it's been previously introduced, as State's Exhibit number 147. I should take a look at that photograph real quick. It's my understanding that no firearm was actually recovered, or at least none was presented to you for examination, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But that photograph, does that represent what a possible .32 caliber revolver would appear to be? Look like?
It's a type of one, yes, it could be.
Okay. But that's what we're talking about when we talk about a .32 caliber revolver, would look something along those lines.
Correct, that is a revolver, and it says it's 32 caliber, yes.
Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your analysis then. States 119A, what are we looking at here?
Those are photographs it looks like I took of the exhibits as I received them.
Okay, why would you take these particular photographs in your analysis?
Whenever I receive evidence into the crime laboratory, I'll photograph it as its condition and what it looks like so that I have a recollection.
Okay. .119B appears to be the same kind of thing.
Yes, sir.
And .119C.
Yes, sir.
Now, why is it that there is, if we look at 119B, you've got white envelopes there versus 119C and D, there's the white envelope on top and then the brown envelope underneath?
Typically, and not always, but typically as we receive projectiles from the medical examiner, they will put them into a secondary envelope.
Okay. So this is just basically you unpacking them?
Correct.
Okay. Why are you so careful in making and documenting these through photographs?
Well, it's my court record, it's my record. I mean, like in this case, it's been a while since I examined this evidence, so it provides me a way to look at it and kind of recollect and recall what I did or what I'm looking at.
Photograph number 119F, what are we looking at here?
That looks like it's exhibit number 94, a photograph that I took.
All right, so this is the actual projectile that we're talking about, correct?
That's correct. Projectile exhibit 94, which I'm not sure what your state's exhibit number is, but that's my exhibit number 94.
Okay, so the 103W state's exhibit number. So this is the actual one from Brandy, top of head on Brandy Peters, correct?
If that's what the record says, yes, sir.
Projectile number 95, it's your exhibit number 95 from the left chest.
Yep, that's a picture that I took, yes, sir.
And these are the actual projectiles that you were asked to examine, correct?
That is correct.
number 96,
Yes, sir.
number 98.
Yes, sir.
Now, looking a little bit different here, go back and look at and compare the two between 96 and 98. They obviously appear to be much different. Why is that?
As projectiles enter a target or hit an object, they can become deformed. The projectile you see on the top there, which is I believe 98, has hit something substantially enough that the nose of it, what we call in a projectile, the nose of the projectile has been damaged. Exhibit number 96 on the bottom of that picture is showing a projectile that appears to be mostly intact, is how we say it. It looks like it would look if it was in an unfired form.
Okay. Is there any degree of difficulty to make it hard to examine one or the other?
It can. Damage can cause difficulties in examination depending on where that damage is. In this case, what you're looking at there is the damage is to the nose of the projectile, which is not where rifling is typically found, so it didn't have much of an impact.
Where is rifling typically found?
If you look at the
You should have
photograph,
a pointer up there, actually. There
What's
should
that?
be a pointer up there, a laser pointer.
is this it?
Yep, top one, top button.
All right. There. So if you look at this picture here, the top picture is what I'm highlighting. This is, I believe, Exhibit 98. You can see this line right here and this line right here. This right here is the rifling. That's where the inside of the firearm has come into contact with that projectile. The spaces in between are the valleys or the ridges in between the rifling inside the firearm. But the main portion of the firearm, which is the rifling, is right inside this area right here. And the marks that we see are within that area typically.
And 119J appears to be another projectile.
Yes, sir.
And finally, 119K.
Yes, sir. That's another photograph I took.
$119L. What are we looking at here?
What you have here in 119L is essentially one of the areas of the projectiles that I'm looking at through the comparison microscope. I'll start with the one on the top left here. It says Exhibit 94 is the exhibit here on the left. You can see there's a black line that goes down the middle. So this is essentially looking down my microscope. So on the left-hand side is Exhibit 94. There's a center line, which is the center line of my microscope. On the right-hand side is Exhibit 15. The notation is 28x, so I'm at 28 times magnification. What you see here is limp. That's a land impression. That's that area I was telling you about that's inside the rifling of the firearm. That's the part that comes into contact with the projectile. And the one north of blue dot index is telling me, as I start looking at these projectiles, when I start cataloging them and looking for marks and looking for those individual characteristics, I put a mark on them to remember where I was. Because in this case, there were 5 different areas to look at. And not only do I look at the base here, but you look all the way down. This is just a representative sample of what I was looking at. And inside there, you can see what we call stria. Those are the imperfections that the rifling of the firearm will put onto a projectile. And what I'm showing in these pictures is a representative sample of how that stria is in agreement with each other.
Okay. And it appears as if you've done a comparison that says Exhibit 94, but it looks like you're also comparing to Exhibit 15, 16, 17, and 38, correct?
That's correct.
So you're looking to make sure that these, in fact, how Exhibit 94 compares to all the other items.
Correct. And during my examination, I try and find the projectile that has the most information on it, the least amount of damage, the most stria. And I try to use that, in this case, without a firearm, I try to use that as my standard that I'm looking at. So I want to compare everything to that because it has the most information for me.
119M. Looks like more comparison photographs.
That's correct.
And it appears as if you're comparing exhibit number 94 with other exhibits as well.
That's correct.
$119N. What are we looking at here?
Okay, 119M, this 119M is in Mary?
Nancy.
Nancy. 119N is in Nancy. The top left photo is exhibit 105. And what I'm showing on that is I'm showing slippage marks. Now, what slippage marks are is when a firearm enters the rifling, it should enter nice and straight. It should enter with no defects to it. Slippage means the bullet has entered into that rifling and slipped a little bit, so it didn't quite engage that rifling perfectly at that time. So there's a little slipping, so it slips a little bit before it engages the rifling. So on this picture, there's little marks down here. It's hard to see how small it is, but there's down here in the bottom of this land impression, there's just a little area where it just quite hasn't grabbed hold of that rifling and it has slipped a little bit. There can also be marks within that slippage area too. The top right picture, as you're looking at it, Exhibit 105, misalignment marks. For misalignment, what that means is that's typically what happens in revolvers. The cylinder doesn't quite align with the barrel properly, so as the bullet enters in, it kind of doesn't enter properly and then slips back on to the proper rifling. In this case, you can see, it's hard to see here, but right here there's a little bit of rifling that starts, and then the main part of the rifling starts. So you can see there's a line right, it comes down through here, and then this one down through here, and then it aligns itself back up here and here, and then this is the main part of the rifling.
Okay. You previously talked about and identified these as being 32 caliber autos.
Correct.
Projectiles.
Correct.
It appeared that you were talking about certain markings on Exhibit 105 that indicate that it would possibly be from a revolver.
That's correct, and the slippage marks I saw on all the projectiles I examined. The misalignment marks were on most of the ones that were undamaged. The ones that you saw that were damaged, those areas were damaged, and I couldn't say one way or the other whether it was a misalignment mark. You want me to continue with the bottom two pictures?
Sure.
The bottom two pictures were taken by me in an attempt to try to identify a brand of ammunition that this could have been from. So I just took those for myself to kind of look at them and then compare them to some standards we had in our laboratory and see if I could determine what brand it was.
So if I understand you then correctly, then the top two we're looking at, Exhibit 105, appears to be a 32 caliber auto, but it was actually fired out of, I guess, the wrong gun, a 32 caliber revolver.
Possibly. I mean, again, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but slippage marks and misalignment marks are typically seen when 32 autos are fired in a 32 revolver as opposed to a semi-automatic firearm.
119.0.
That appears to be a close-up of the misalignment marks, and again, here, and it comes down through here.
119P.
That's a close-up showing the slippage right here. It's slipped a little bit, and then it's not there's a little slippage here, but it's slipped a little bit, so it's not really sharp on the edges.
119Q.
Again, that's just a blow-up of the nose of the projectile, seeing if I could identify a brand.
Were you able to identify that?
Not with any certainty, no.
Okay. And 119R.
That's also just the photograph I took to try and identify the brand.
Photograph 119S.
This looks like a close-up of one of the identification photographs.
119T.
Same thing, a close-up of one of the identification photographs.
And when you say identification photographs, you're talking about where you made the alignments and checked to see if they're the same striations and markings.
Correct, and again, I'll stress that this is just a representative sample of what I saw. I don't take a picture of every mark, everything I see, every piece of rifling. What this is showing me is that within this area, it's a good area showing you all the agreement of the stria. That would also carry over into the next area to look at, and then the next area.
And 119U.
Again, looks like a close-up of an identification photo I took.
It looks like the rest of them are going to be similar. 119V, another
Yes.
photograph of the examination.
Yes, sir.
119W, same.
Yes, sir.
Now, you got a big thing here. What is that how does that factor into your comparisons?
That could be material, that could be body fluids, it could be material, it could be plant material, it could be whatever it went through. We take those things into consideration when we are examining projectiles. If need be, we can try to clean the projectile if it tends to get in the way. There are times where things get imparted on the projectile that take away our rifling. In this case, having that little area there didn't affect my examination.
So you're talking about that could possibly be blood from the person that was shot?
Possibly.
119X, again, appears to be another comparison photograph.
Yes, sir.
119Y
Yes, sir.
appears to be another one of those, some other sort of foreign material.
That may be an area where the rifling didn't, what we'd say, bottom out. The rifling this part of that projectile may not have impacted the rifling inside, and so no marks were placed there. That's not uncommon.
119Z, again, same thing.
Yes, sir.
And finally, 119AA. Alright. So doing your examination and looking at those photographs, or at least those photographs exhibiting what it is that you were looking at, were you able to form an opinion as to whether or not these projectiles were fired from the same gun?
Yes, sir, I was.
What was that opinion?
In my opinion, after looking at the microscopic markings and the imperfections on the the projectiles, it was my opinion that the 10 projectiles were fired from the same unknown firearm.
Okay. You say unknown firearm. Are you able to make any kind of determination about the kind of gun or make of gun based upon any of those markings that you had there?
Yes, as I receive the projectile into the laboratory, I fill out an information worksheet on it. What that does is it gives me an idea of what I'm looking at, what caliber it is, what style it is, how much it weighs. And in that rifling, we're able to measure how big that rifling is. What these are called class characteristics. It's a class of firearm. It's like when Ford makes cars, they've got different classes. They have a Mustang, they have a F-150. So it's not identifiable to a specific item. But in those class characteristics, I can measure them. In this case, we had 5 rifling grooves that twisted to the right. Some firearms are 6 left, some are 9 right. So it varies depending on the manufacturer, and they determine that as they manufacture the firearm. So I'm able to see how many of those are. In this case, we had 5 right. Then I can measure how wide they are. And when I measure how wide they are, with other information, I can put it into a database. It's called the General Rifling Characteristic Database. What that allows me to do is gives me an idea what kind of firearms could have fired it. Now, it's not all inclusive. It doesn't include every single firearm ever made, but it gives me a good marker on where to go, how to tell investigators what they're looking for.
Okay. And were you able to make a determination as to based upon those lands and grooves and markings with the twist about what kind of firearm you would typically see from these projectiles being fired from?
Basically, after entering that information into the database, the specifications included revolvers manufactured by Smith & Wesson, both in .32 Smith & Wesson and .32 Smith & Wesson long. And from the characteristics, one of the firearms could possibly have been what's called a top break firearm. And what that means is, if you look at that firearm on the photograph right there, that cylinder comes out, it swings out. A top break, the firearm would actually break open from the top. You put the cartridge in and close it back up. It doesn't mean it is a top break, but that was one of the ones that showed up.
Okay, so it could be either top break or this kind of revolver is what we're talking about.
Correct.
Okay, but it definitely the lines and grooves, the lands and grooves indicate it was probably a Smith & Wesson revolver of some kind.
More like than not. And again, I'll emphasize the list is not all inclusive. Doesn't include every single firearm made.
Now let's talk real quick about this gun. Not necessarily this gun, but a revolver in general. We're talking about the cylinder, whether it's top breech or pop open on the side. How many bullets does that hold?
It depends on the firearm. Usually there's no less than 5. Typically they hold 5, and they can go, depending on the caliber, can go up to 9.
Okay. But with 10, you would expect at some point somebody stopped to reload if it was fired from the same gun.
With a .32 caliber, typically they're 5-shot or 6-shot. They can be up to 7-shot. But yeah, I would expect with .32 caliber that you'd have to reload that cylinder, unless, again, there's a firearm I've not seen that holds 10.
Okay, in 13 years, though, you did a lot of firearms and familiar with most of them.
That's correct.
One second.
Any juror have a question of this witness? All right, you can step down. Do we need to keep him any further?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you need him for any reason, Mr. Prince.
No, Your Honor.
All right, you're excused. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir.
Call your next witness.
Your Honor, I'm sorry to ask for this, but we're gonna have that, the computer to play a video for next, and we've got to shuffle witnesses around, do the schedule, and we can take a brief break.
All right, let's step out. Let's take 10 minutes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, Your Honor, before you leave, can we just talk about scheduling real quick, please?
That'd be seated.
And Your Honor, I gave you a list earlier of potential witnesses today. We've actually shuffled some around, given the court schedule over the next couple of days. It is our anticipation now that we're gonna try and fill a whole day Tuesday. We may not be able to, due to unavailability of one of the witnesses testifying in another homicide trial in Tampa. So we may end up having to go into, Wednesday morning. We're gonna do our best to fill up, but we wanna make the court aware of that. Obviously, we had to make adjustments without the court tomorrow and things like that. We just asked for a little, leeway there. Obviously, you know, I'm gonna try to fill it up the best I can, but there is that potential.
Well, how much are you thinking you're gonna have, Mr. Prince?
You mean in the defense case?
Length of your presentation, defense case?
As best I can figure, probably 2.5 days. The only caveat to that is depending on when Mr. Hughes finishes next week. It's possible we could finish before the end of the day on Friday. Mr. Knox was going to be unavailable on Monday the 18th. We could discuss when the stuff is.
I thought we figured out something around that.
If it looks like we're going to do that, then I am going to. The problem is he's got a class that he teaches. I've asked him to try and make accommodation to become available if it looks like we're going to finish early. So that's still a possibility as well.
Well, I was hoping to have it to the jury on Friday.
And Your Honor, with all honesty, if Mr. Santos is testifying, there's gonna be a lot more involved by the state.
Well, I know, we're getting in a posture, you're leaving no time for the penalty phase. If we're gonna have a penalty phase, we have to have it done. We can't get into the Thanksgiving week. We've told them we weren't gonna be here then. So we can't keep losing time here. It's what you're telling me, we're losing time. We're gonna put it into a scheduling problem.
I think that last time we discussed that the death penalty part would only take, I think, a full day is what we discussed last time. So I still think we're in a posture to finish up by that Friday with the death penalty included.
Every time we lose time, we put it further back, so,
Like I said, I'm doing my best to make sure
Right.
it is. We were anticipating finishing on
Right.
Wednesday anyway, Wednesday morning as it is. We had some hopes about possibly Tuesday, but in
Right.
projecting out, we were already talking about Wednesday morning.
I don't remember saying that I was okay with Mr. Knox testifying on Monday. I'm thinking that's not real likely to work, so, what's his problem again?
He's teaching a class every day next week.
Well, I mean, we're here trying a first degree murder case, you know, he may have to miss a class, that's not acceptable, just to kick it over to another week, just so he can teach a class, that's not acceptable. We're gonna need to keep it going, so, you know, don't suggest to him that we're gonna do that. I don't know. We'll see, but we need to, we can't keep killing time. All right, we'll take 5 minutes.
Thank you.